Thank you so much for all your incredible love and support. If you enjoyed this story and want to experience more spine-chilling tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a frightful new video. It was just another mundane Tuesday when everything went horribly wrong. I was sitting at my desk in the precinct, finishing up some routine paperwork from a recent case. Being a homicide detective meant dealing with more than my fair share of gruesome crime scenes and cold-blooded murderers. But I had always taken comfort in the brotherhood of the force. My fellow officers and I were a tight-knit team, or so I thought. The shrill ringing of my desk phone pierced the calm. A body had been discovered downtown, dumped in an alley behind O'Leary's pub. I gulped the last sip of cold coffee and headed out, ready to begin processing the scene. Arriving in the gritty alleyway, I was greeted by the sight of the forensics team already photographing the area around the victim. She was a young woman, 20-something, pretty, no ID on her, no purse or wallet nearby, but there were multiple stab wounds on her torso, indicating a violent struggle and deliberate murder. I pulled on gloves and began assessing the scene. That's when a glint of metal caught my eye. Next to the victim's left hand was a bloody knife. But not just any knife. The customized hilt and serrated edge were unmistakable. It was the exact make and model of my tactical knife, standard issue for officers in the department. My heart froze as I realized this was no coincidence. Someone was clearly trying to frame me. But who? And why target me? A dozen paranoid theories flashed through my mind. Before I could process this unnerving development, the captain showed up. His face flushed with alarm when he spotted the planted knife next to the body. He barked orders to arrest me on the spot pending a full investigation. I pleaded desperately with him, trying to explain I was being set up, but my protests fell on deaf ears. No one was interested in giving me the benefit of the doubt. In their eyes, I was already guilty as charged. At the station, I was put on forced leave and stripped of my badge and gun. The internal affairs team wasted no time tearing apart my career. They pulled all my case files, scrutinizing them for any sign of misconduct or wrongdoing. My personal life was invaded without reservation. They interrogated neighbors, colleagues, even ex-girlfriends, digging for any dirt they could find to support their supposed case against me. It was a systematic character assassination. Within 72 hours, I was sitting in a jail cell, charged with first-degree murder. Blindsided and abandoned, I racked my brain trying to figure out who framed me and why. I had clearly upset some very dangerous people with something in my work. But my priorities now were getting out of custody and conducting my own covert investigation. I knew my only chance was to escape and go off the grid. The next time the guards came to retrieve me, I was ready to make my move. I managed to overtake them, get outside, and secure transport away from the area. I was now a wanted fugitive, but that was the least of my concerns. I needed to do whatever it took to clear my name and restore my reputation. Leaning on old confidential informants from my cases, I started chasing leads. It wasn't long before I uncovered whispers about secret dealings between the captain and known crime syndicates. He was apparently on the take, protecting illegal operations from police interference. This pointed to a strong motive for him to want me discredited and out of the way. I slowly and discreetly gathered concrete evidence tying the captain to organized crime corruption. After months of vigilance, I had enough to prove I'd been set up. I leaked the incriminating details anonymously to the local newspaper, who finally exposed the ugly truth. With his treachery out in the open, the captain was swiftly arrested. The false allegations against me were dropped, though my ordeal was far from over. In the end, I was vindicated legally, but my name and psyche remained tarnished. I had been betrayed by my fellow officers and branded a killer in front of the whole city. The system I once revered had turned on me when I needed its protection most. Though glad to see some justice served, my optimism and faith in the badge were shattered. I turned in my resignation, no longer able to serve on a force that could so easily crucify one of its own. Keeping a low profile, I hoped to one day restore my reputation. But for now, just remaining free was a victory, however hollow it felt without the career that had defined me. I left the force disheartened, but refusing to let the corruption and conspiracy destroy my spirit. I was a good cop, and the truth had finally come to light. It was just another mundane day on the job as a rookie cop. I was tasked with organizing the dusty archive room, sorting through the stacks of old case files and police reports that piled up over the decades. It was busy work, just a way to keep me preoccupied and out of the seasoned cop's way. As I worked, sifting through the faded manila folders, my eyes landed on one labeled West Side Slasher 82. My curiosity was instantly piqued. I slid the file out from the cabinet and began flipping through. Inside were horrific crime scene photos of victims, young women, mid-20s, attractive, dark-haired. Their bodies had been viciously slashed, sexually assaulted and discarded like trash in alleyways across town. A serial killer who was never caught. I'm not sure what compelled me to take that file home and continue digging into the unsolved case. Maybe it was my rookie ambition, thinking I could be the one to finally crack it when so many detectives failed before me. Or just morbid curiosity getting the better of my judgment. Whatever the reason, I found myself staying late night after night, poring over every gruesome detail in the West Side Slasher file once my patrol shift ended. I memorized each victim's face and name, mapped out the abduction sites and dump locations, searched for any clues the original investigators might have missed. The killings had gone on for nearly a year before abruptly stopping in late 1982, when the lead detective took early retirement. Around the same time, a Jane Doe matching the victim profile was found dead of an apparent overdose. Too many coincidences for my liking. My sergeant caught me with the file and reprimanded me harshly. This was a closed case, he reminded me. The retired lead detective had done all he could back in '82 without today's forensics. I needed to leave the past buried, but I couldn't let it go that easy. I made copies of the entire case file and continued the investigation from home against orders, determined to find breakthroughs that could bring justice to the slain women after all these years. My off-duty obsession with the cold case started affecting my performance as a patrol officer. I was distracted and unfocused, consumed by the unsolved murders night and day. My partner noticed I was behaving erratically, jumping at shadows while out on calls, but I couldn't bring myself to reveal what I'd uncovered about the West Side Slasher. I didn't know who I could still trust on the force after all this time. The final pieces started coming together when I followed a hunch and cross-referenced the retired lead detective's case files with recent missing persons reports. Several young women fitting the slasher's victim profile had disappeared over the past year, though no bodies had turned up yet. My gut told me the killer had returned after decades of laying low and was using his insider knowledge of police procedures to avoid detection. I considered taking everything I knew to my sergeant, but hesitated. If my theory proved true, the only suspect could be the lead detective who failed to catch the West Side Slasher in '82. I had no evidence, only speculation based on my own unauthorized digging, and now innocent lives hung in the balance if I didn't act fast to stop this monster. Throwing caution and protocol to the wind, I began secretly surveilling the former detective's home address, hoping to catch him in the act before he could disappear more girls. I knew it was reckless and foolish to go it alone without backup, but the higher-ups had made it abundantly clear this case should stay buried forever. For several tense nights, I sat parked down the block from his place, mainlining stale coffee and watching for any suspicious activity. My risky stakeout finally paid off in the dead of night when the ex-detective emerged from his home dragging a large, heavy duffel bag to his car. My pulse pounded as I observed from the shadows. This was no time for hesitation or second-guessing. I had to follow and put an end to this nightmare. We drove to a deserted area by the old waterfront docks. He parked at the end of a pier, the Black River spreading out before us. I watched with dawning horror as he lifted a dead young woman's limp body from the duffel and dumped her over the edge. My suspicions were true. The West Side Slasher and the lead detective were one and the same. I couldn't let him slip away again. Gripping my service pistol in a cold sweat, I emerged from the shadows to finally confront the elusive killer I'd unwittingly exposed. The aging detective turned to me with an eerie, knowing grin that chilled me to my core. You just couldn't let an old man's secret stay buried. Could you, rookie? His hand moved subtly toward his coat, and I braced myself for the end of this twisted tale. My heart pounded as I aimed my gun with trembling hands. It's over. Put your hands up and get down on the ground now, I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The ex-detective chuckled darkly, ignoring my command. You don't know what you've stumbled into, son. I kept this city clean for years from the filth like those girls. The weak and innocent must be culled for society to thrive. His hand emerged clutching a switchblade, the steel flashing under the dock lights. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as he lunged, slashing the knife viciously at my chest and neck. I fired off 2 rounds, striking him in the shoulder and thigh. He collapsed with a scream of rage and agony. I kicked the bloodied knife from his grasp and cuffed him while radioing for backup. As the wail of sirens approached, I knew this nightmare wasn't over. There would still be evidence to uncover, more victims to identify, families to notify. The monster I helped expose would one day face justice for his crimes. But for now, I took small comfort in knowing the West Side Slasher's reign of terror had finally come to an end on that dark, deserted pier. The rookie who stumbled onto a decades-old cold case had survived to tell the tale, while the killer who eluded capture met a reckoning long overdue. It started with an unsettling phone call from a blocked number. The gruff, hushed voice on the other end claimed to have explosive information about a secret rogue unit operating within the city's police force. He rattled off disturbing allegations: blackmail, extortion, excessive force, and even murder. It sounded outlandish, but something about his insistence struck a nerve. I'm Kate, an investigative journalist, so tips about corruption usually pique my interest. But the haunted tone in this man's voice gave me pause. He refused to identify himself and hung up abruptly after saying he'd be in touch. In the weeks that followed, I tried tracing the number and gently investigating his claims, not wanting to attract too much attention. I interviewed activists and citizens in low-income areas, knowing they'd be more likely to have had negative police encounters. Many recounted stories that aligned with the caller's allegations: falsified arrest reports, planted evidence, intimidation tactics. The clergyman of a local church told me about witnessing 2 officers badly beat a teenager before detaining him for resisting arrest. An activist group showed me data on racial disparities in traffic stops and use of force incidents. Alone, each account could be dismissed, but together, they suggested a troubling pattern of abuse. I cautiously reached out to a detective acquaintance on the force, the closest thing to a friend I had there. We'd shared tips in the past, so I hoped he could be an ally. But when I mentioned the term rogue unit, his steady gaze narrowed. He quickly ended our coffee and I never heard from him again. Something had chilled him to the core. That's when this graduated from a hunch to a credible story in my mind. As I continued reporting under the radar, I noticed strange occurrences that felt like more than coincidences. Unfamiliar cars parked outside my apartment at odd hours, my phone crackling as if it was being tapped. Documents missing from my editor's folders. It became clear I was stepping on very powerful toes. Desperate for someone to confide in, I approached my seasoned editor, Marjorie. But when I laid out my findings about the rogue police unit, alarm flashed across her usually stoic face. The next day, she pulled me into her office to say I needed to drop this conspiracy theory. When I refused and left angrily, she reassigned me to cover the upcoming library renovations. I was being silenced and shut out of my own story, close to a major break in what appeared to be massive corruption. I couldn't abandon such a critical story, so I got scrappy. I continued investigating after hours using burner phones and encrypted messaging apps. For every new horror story I uncovered about the unit's operations, the terror tactics against me escalated as well. My tires were slashed in the office parking lot. Strange clicks and echoes on my calls. An unfamiliar black sedan tailing me after interviews. Whoever these rogue officers were, they operated with impunity, and I was in their crosshairs. After 6 more weeks of reporting in secret, I had dozens of pages full of hard evidence of their appalling misdeeds, including confidential eyewitness and whistleblower testimonies. The truth had to come to light. I decided to go straight to our newspaper's publisher and turn the expose into a massive feature piece. As soon as I hit send on the article that would expose it all, a sense of dread washed over me. Had I just put a target on my back? The unusual activity around my apartment accelerated. Strange men photographing my comings and goings, delivery packages gone missing, my electricity randomly cut. They wanted me to know I was being watched, that they could get me at any moment. I hardly slept, waiting for the violent retaliation I knew was coming. I stopped going out alone, wary of disappearing into a black site forever. Part of me wished I could take back the article I had sent and just fade anonymously into obscurity. But the truth needed to come out, no matter the personal risk. After 2 agonizing weeks, the piece was set to run on Sunday's front page. On Saturday evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly, a package delivery man with an unmarked large envelope. I knew immediately it was a warning, likely one final chance to pull the article. Instead, I dropped it directly in the shredder unopened. Less than an hour later, I watched through the blinds as multiple unmarked cars converged outside my building. I knew my life as I knew it was over. I slipped out the back stairwell with just the clothes on my back, got into a nondescript car I had rented weeks before, and just started driving. As the city faded behind me in the rearview mirror, tears streamed down my face, not knowing if I'd ever return or see the people I loved again. But I had done what was right, and had to have faith the truth would protect others, even if it couldn't protect me.